The first time Elena knew she had lost her husband, it wasn't the day he left for war, it was the day he came back. He returned with the same eyes, the same voice, the same hands that had once held her in the dark when they had nothing but each other, but something inside him had gone cold. Or maybe something new had been lit, something that had no room for Elena. That night, while she warmed the soup she had spent hours making, her mother's recipe, the one he always asked for when he missed home, he looked at the bowl, pushed it aside, and said, "I'm not the same man who left, Elena. You need to learn to live with that." She didn't cry. Not that night, because she still didn't know how much she had left to lose. Elena Vargas was 54 years old when her entire life rearranged itself without asking her permission. She was not a fragile woman. She never had been. She grew up in a small town in the north, the daughter of a seamstress and a carpenter who taught her that things that last are built with your hands, not your words. By the time she was 12, Elena was sewing, first to help her mother, then to pay for school, then to survive. Her fingers knew thread the way some people know music, by instinct, by the memory of the body. When she met Marcos, she was 24 years old, and he was a man who spoke little but kept every promise he made. They married with little money and a lot of shared silence. From that silence came 3 children, Diego, Camila, and little Tomas. In the early years, they were poor but solid. Elena sewed at home while the kids slept. Marcos worked construction. Both of them knew that if they pushed together, they would get somewhere, and they did. They bought a small house, then expanded it, then started a small clothing business that Elena ran with the precision of a watchmaker. They were a real family, with real problems, but together. Then the notice came. Marcos had military reserve status from an agreement he had signed years before, something Elena never fully understood. And when the conflict at the border escalated, his name appeared on the list. She said goodbye to him at the airport with all 3 children hanging from her legs. He looked her in the eyes and said, "Take care of everything. I'll be back." Elena believed that promise for 2 years, 4 months, and 11 days. The Marcos who came back from war walked differently, spoke differently, and looked at Elena the way you look at furniture. At first, she told herself it was trauma. She had read about it, seen documentaries, men who come back from combat zones with fractured souls, who need time, space, silence. She gave him all of it, space, silence, patience. But time revealed something that trauma alone couldn't explain. 3 months after his return, Marcos started coming home late. Not beaten up, not dirty. He came home smelling like someone else's cologne, calm in a way that felt rehearsed. His phone always face down on the table. Elena said nothing. 6 months in, the business finances started shifting in ways she couldn't trace. Marcos had asked for access to the shared accounts to help reorganize things, he said. Elena, who had never denied her husband anything, signed the paperwork without reading every line, a mistake she would pay for. 1 year after his return, Marcos brought someone to the family dinner table. Her name was Renata, 32 years old. Calculated smile, eyes that measured everything in the room. "She's my assistant on the new project," Marcos said, as if introducing a woman like that to his wife's table was the most normal thing in the world. That evening, Diego, the oldest son, 28 years old, congratulated his father on the great energy Renata brought to the team. Camila, the middle child, looked at her mother with something Elena couldn't quite read in that moment. Pity? Discomfort? Something worse? Little Tomas, 19 years old, never looked up from his phone. Elena served the food. She smiled, and she stored everything in that place where women keep things they can't cry about yet. The months that followed were a slow accumulation of small cruelties. Marco stopped asking how she was, stopped consulting her on business decisions, started inviting people to the house, colleagues, partners, without warning her, and when Elena wasn't prepared in time, he would sigh heavily in front of everyone and say, "Elena, please, it's not that complicated." Diego would laugh. Camila would look the other way. One afternoon, Elena heard Marcos on the phone in the backyard. She wasn't spying. She had simply stepped outside to water her plants, that small garden she had built with seeds and patience over the years. She heard his voice, low, warm, a warmth he no longer used with her. "Don't worry, sweetheart. Everything is going exactly as we planned. I just need a little more time." Elena kept watering. 1 plant, 2 plants, 3. But her hands weren't trembling from sadness anymore. They were trembling from something else entirely. To understand what Elena was about to do, you have to understand what Elena had been. When Marcos left for war, the clothing business was at a breaking point. They owed money to 2 suppliers. A key employee had just quit, and an important contract depended on a delivery that no one else could coordinate. Elena handled it alone, with 3 kids, sleeping fewer than 5 hours a night for months, sewing, coordinating, negotiating with suppliers who initially didn't take her seriously because she was the owner's wife and not the owner herself. She made them change their minds. In the first year of Marcos's absence, Elena didn't just save the business, she tripled it. She opened a 2nd production line, signed contracts with stores in the city, hired 4 new employees, built from scratch and with her own hands the financial stability that her husband was now using as a launchpad for his new life. During those 2 years of war, Elena also paid the mortgage on their house, alone, every month, without fail, kept all 3 children in school, sent money to Marcos's mother when she fell ill. Money that came from the business, from sewing hours, from Elena's own sweat. She wrote letters, many letters, because Marcos was stationed in an area with no reliable signal, and physical mail was the only consistent way to reach him. Elena wrote every week. She told him about the kids, the business, the garden, the small victories. He wrote back every 3 or 4 weeks, short letters, functional, but she kept every single one. She kept them in a wooden box her father had made by hand before he died, a box where Elena kept the things she couldn't afford to lose. What no one knew, not even her own children, was that inside that box there wasn't just letters. There were also documents. Elena was not a naive woman. There was something in Marcos's voice during the final stretch of the war, something in the tone of his letters, something in the silences between the words, that had quietly set off an alarm in her chest. It wasn't certainty, it was instinct. And Elena, who had learned from childhood to trust her hands to know when a fabric was about to tear, had also learned to trust that instinct. 3 months before Marcos came home, Elena made a silent decision. She went to the bank, alone. She met with an advisor, an older woman, last name Torres, who had spent 20 years managing family accounts and who had the kind of eyes that understand everything without needing to be told. Elena explained the situation, not dramatically, with facts. "My husband is coming home soon. I want to understand exactly what we have, what is in my name, and what I need to protect." Mrs. Torres nodded. They spent 2 hours going through documents together. When Elena left the bank, she had a thick folder under her arm and something new in her chest. Not fear, clarity. That same week, Elena called a lawyer, one who had been recommended to her years before, but who she had never needed. Her name was Patricia Guerrero, specialist in family law and property rights. Elena didn't tell her she suspected anything. She just said she wanted to get things in order before the family reunion. Patricia Guerrero also understood without being told, and they got to work. The confirmation came in the most ordinary way possible. A Tuesday afternoon, light rain. Elena was in the back room of the business reviewing invoices when she heard voices in the main office. Marcos had stopped by that day to check on things, something he had been doing more and more often since he was supposedly reorganizing the business structure. Elena went still, not from fear, from instinct. The voices were Marcos and Diego, her oldest son, the one who laughed when his father humiliated her in public. She caught fragments. "The transfer paperwork is ready, Dad. We just need her signature." "She's not going to suspect anything, Diego. Your mother always trusts." "Does Renata know the house is part of the deal too?" "Renata knows everything. She's known everything for 2 years." Elena didn't move. She breathed. She counted the marks on the wall in front of her the way she counted stitches, keeping the line straight. 1, 2, 3. After a moment, she walked out of the back room, crossed the hallway, leaned into the doorway, and said in a perfectly steady voice, "Can I get you two some coffee?" Marcos looked at her. Diego looked at her. Both said yes. Elena went to the kitchen, made the coffee, and while the water boiled, she opened her phone and sent a message to Patricia Guerrero. 4 words. "We have enough. Let's move." That night, after Marcos fell asleep, Elena sat in the garden. It was late. The cold air had that clean texture that only exists after rain. She looked at her plants, the same ones she had tended for years, the ones that had survived dry spells, hard summers, the neglect of difficult winters, and she thought about her mother. Her mother, the seamstress, had taught her something that Elena had taken decades to fully understand. Thread doesn't break when you pull it hard. It breaks when it's worn down from the inside, from the friction of too many days. That's why you have to know when to change it before it ruins the whole fabric. Elena had let that thread wear down too long. No more. Inside the house, Marcos slept. The man who had planned to take everything from her. Diego slept. The son who had helped him, and Tomas, the youngest, who maybe knew nothing, or maybe knew everything and had chosen not to look. Camilla was at her apartment, 20 minutes away. Of her 3 children, Camilla was the only one who had kept calling Elena during those months to ask, quietly, "Are you okay, Mom?" Elena had always said yes, but that night she texted Camilla, "I need you to come over tomorrow at 10, alone. Don't say anything to anyone." Camilla didn't ask why, she just said, "I'll be there." Elena put her phone down, looked at the garden one last time, and went inside. She walked quietly to the bedroom. Marcos was sleeping with his back to her. Elena lay down without making a sound, and that night, for the first time in years, she slept deeply. Over the following weeks, Elena moved with the precision of someone who had been sewing by hand for 40 years. No rushing, no mistakes, no loose ends. The plan had 4 layers. First layer, the property. During her visit to the bank with Mrs. Torres, Elena had discovered something Marcos didn't know she knew. The mortgage on their home had been paid entirely with business income documented, invoice by invoice, in Elena's name. Patricia Guerrero filed a motion for differentiated property contribution recognition. In plain English, if anyone tried to move the property, the court would first have to acknowledge who had actually been holding it up. That would take time, and time was Elena's ally. Second layer, the business. Marcos had requested access to the business accounts to reorganize. What he didn't know was that weeks before granting him that access, Elena had transferred the entire operational structure, contracts, suppliers, active accounts, to a new business entity, an entity registered in the name of Elena Vargas only. What Marcos had access to was an empty shell, numbers that looked fine on paper but moved nothing real. Third layer, the documentation. The wooden box Elena had kept for years wasn't just full of letters. It held receipts, bank statements, proof of every payment Elena had made alone during the 2 years of war and the year and a half that followed. Patricia Guerrero had turned them into a 74-page legal file. Fourth layer, the testimony, Camilla. When Elena sat down with her daughter that morning, she told her everything, without crying, with the same tone she used when teaching her to sew, direct, clear, no unnecessary decoration. Camilla listened in silence. By the end, her eyes were red, but her voice was steady. "What do you need from me, Mom?" "Just tell the truth when the moment comes." "And is it coming?" Elena nodded. "Next week." It all started on a Thursday. Marcos woke up early, as usual, went to the bathroom, got dressed, picked up his phone. He had a message from his bank. Unauthorized activity detected on business account, access temporarily suspended. He frowned. Called the bank. They explained there was a legal process underway that required a review of shared account access. He came downstairs for breakfast. Elena was in the kitchen, back turned, slicing fruit. "Do you know anything about a problem with the business account?" "No," said Elena without turning around. "Is something wrong?" Marcos exhaled sharply. "I'm calling Diego." Diego didn't know anything either, or that's what he said. That afternoon, Marcos drove to the business office to review the active contracts. He wanted to move forward with the transfer he had planned with Diego. The receptionist greeted him warmly. "Good morning, Mr. Marcos. Do you have an appointment?" He stared at her. "An appointment? I'm the owner." The receptionist, without losing her smile, checked her screen. "According to our updated records, the registered owner of this business is Elena Vargas. If you'd like to meet with her, I can schedule something for tomorrow." Marcos walked out without saying a word. That night he came home charged with a different kind of energy. Tense, pacing, staring at his phone, starting calls and hanging up before anyone answered. Elena was in the living room, sewing, calm, thread straight, needle steady. "Elena, I need you to explain to me what's going on." She looked up at him. "Marcos, sit down. There are things we need to talk about." But it wasn't time yet. Elena knew that. "Tomorrow. I'm tired tonight." And she kept sewing. Friday morning, Renata arrived at the business office. She walked in with confidence, a folder under her arm, and the smile of someone who assumes the world belongs to her. The receptionist greeted her the same way she had greeted Marcos. "Do you have an appointment?" Renata explained she was a partner of Mr. Marcos and needed to review some contracts. "I'm sorry. Access to internal documents requires authorization from the owner. I can give you her attorney's contact information if you'd like to coordinate." The folder felt heavier in Renata's hands after that. That afternoon, Elena received a call from Patricia Guerrero. They just received the official notification. Marcos and his attorney know about the file. They have 48 hours to respond. How did they react? "His attorney is requesting an urgent meeting." "Good," said Elena. "Tell them to wait until Monday." The weekend was a slow buildup of pressure inside the house. Marcos moved between manipulation and intimidation, two tools he had used for years and that now found nothing to grab onto. He tried nostalgia. "Elena, think about everything we've built together." She thought about it. She knew exactly who had built it. He tried threats. "If you go through with this, you're going to lose your kids." Elena thought about Camilla. She thought about Tomas, who had sent her a short but significant message that week. "Mom, I don't know everything that's happening, but if you need anything, I'm here." Diego was a different story. Diego had chosen his side a long time ago. That hurt. That would always hurt. But hurt and weakness were no longer the same thing for Elena. Monday came. The meeting was held at Patricia Guerrero's office, a small conference room, white light, a long table. On one side, Marcos, Diego, and their attorney, a man in a gray suit who spoke fast and used a lot of words to say very little. On the other side, Elena and Patricia Guerrero. Camilla arrived 5 minutes late and sat down next to her mother. Diego looked at her with something close to surprise. Marcos said nothing. The gray suit attorney spoke first for several minutes about Marcos's rights as a spouse, about his contributions to the business from a strategic vision standpoint, about the possible irregularities in the recent transfers Elena had made. Patricia Guerrero waited for him to finish. Then she opened the 74-page file. She placed it on the table. This file documents, with full banking and accounting support, every dollar that Elena Vargas contributed to this family's assets from the year her husband was absent due to military service. It includes mortgage payments, supplier payments, employee salaries, commercial taxes, and capital reinvestments. The total represents 91% of the current value of the assets in dispute. Silence. Additionally, Patricia continued, we have documentation establishing that the transfer plan being prepared would have constituted fraudulent asset stripping. In legal terms, that is not a divorce proceeding. That is something else entirely. The gray suit attorney cleared his throat. Marcos looked at Elena. For the first time in a long time, he actually looked at her. Elena. She didn't cut him off. She let him speak. Is this really necessary? Can't we handle this as a family? Elena took a moment. Marcos, you stopped handling things as a family the day you decided Renata was your family and I was your problem. Diego opened his mouth. Camilla looked at him. Diego closed his mouth. Elena didn't want to destroy anyone. That was the thing no one in that room understood yet. Not Marcos, not Diego, not the gray-suit attorney. She hadn't walked into that meeting to burn everything to the ground. She had walked in to be fair, but fair on her own terms. What Patricia Guerrero proposed on Elena's behalf was as follows. The house would go to Elena, completely, non-negotiable because the documentation was unassailable. The business would go to Elena, also non-negotiable. Marcos would receive a fair financial settlement for his original contribution, calculated up to the day he left for war, because from that point on, the numbers told the story themselves. Marcos and Renata were free to build whatever they wanted, but with what was theirs, not with what belonged to Elena. Diego, who had actively participated in the transfer scheme, would need to return 2 payments that had been drawn from the business accounts over the last several months, payments that had gone to his name, payments he knew were not his. There would be no criminal complaint if those payments were returned within 30 days. That was all. Marcos listened to every point with his jaw tight. At the end, he said, "And if I don't agree?" Patricia Guerrero calmly closed the file. Then the file goes to the court this afternoon, and the proceedings become public record, including the documentation on the accounts and the movements prior to the transfer attempt. A pause. "The choice is yours, Mr. Marcos." Marcos looked at Diego. Diego didn't look back. Marcos signed. 3 weeks later, as the legal dust began to settle, Camila came over for coffee with her mother. They were sitting in the garden. The afternoon light had that golden quality that makes everything feel slower and more real at the same time. Camilla held her mug with both hands. "Mom, I have a question." "Go ahead." "When did you actually know? Not about Renata, about all of it. When did you know you had to start preparing?" Elena looked at the plants for a moment. "Do you remember when your father wrote to me from the operations zone about 8 months before he came home? He sent a letter saying he had been thinking a lot, and that when he returned he wanted to reorganize his life." Camilla nodded. For most wives, that would have sounded like hope, a man who wants to make things better. Elena smiled quietly. "But I knew your father. When Marcos actually wanted to improve something, he just did it. He never announced it. When he announced something, it was because he was preparing someone for news." Camilla took a moment to process that. "So you already knew before he even got home?" "I didn't know what, but I knew something was coming." "And Mrs. Torres at the bank, and Patricia Guerrero?" "I went to the bank 2 weeks after that letter." Camilla made a small sound, somewhere between a laugh and amazement. "Mom." "Camilla, there's something your grandmother taught me when I was a little girl. She used to say, 'A woman who knows how to sew is never afraid of winter, because she knows she can make herself the coat she needs.'" "I just made my coat." Camilla set her mug on the table and wrapped her arms around her mother. Outside in the garden, the plants kept growing. But there was something else Camilla didn't know, something Elena hadn't told anyone yet, not her daughter, not the attorney, not a single soul. Mrs. Torres from the bank was not a stranger. She was the younger sister of the seamstress who had been Elena's first teacher, the woman who had taught her to make her first stitch at 8 years old, the woman who had told her that good thread doesn't break, it bends, it waits, and it holds when you need it most. Elena hadn't walked into that bank by accident. She had walked in because over 40 years she had quietly built a network of women who looked out for each other, and when the moment came, that network held everything up. 6 months later, Elena's business had a new location, larger, better situated. With 12 employees, all women, most of them mothers, and a workshop in the back where Elena taught sewing classes every Saturday morning. Not for money, because her mother had taught her that things that last are passed down through the hands. The house was still hers, the garden hers. The wooden box her father had built, now holding the legal file alongside the old letters, also hers. Marcos and Renata had moved to another city. Diego had returned the payments within the deadline. He hadn't asked for forgiveness. Maybe someday he would. Elena wasn't waiting, but she wasn't closing the door either. Tomas called every Sunday. Camilla came for coffee every week. One afternoon, while Elena was teaching in the workshop, one of her students, a young woman around 25 with the eyes of someone who has lived more than she should have, asked her, "How do you know when a fabric can be saved and when you have to start over?" Elena thought about Marcos, about the good years and the broken ones, about the war that had taken him away and the different person it had sent back. She thought about the garden plants, about the threads that hold and the ones that wear out. "When fabric is damaged," Elena said slowly, "the first thing you do is check whether the problem is in the thread or in the stitch. If it's the stitch, you can undo it and redo it. But if it's the thread—" She paused. "You have to have the courage to cut it clean, because a worn thread damages everything it touches." The young woman nodded. Elena looked toward the window. Outside, the afternoon sun fell across the street with that late-day light that promises nothing and yet illuminates everything. She thought about the first time she had ever held a needle, 8 years old, her mother's hands guiding hers. "The thread doesn't decide anything," her mother had told her then. "You're the one who decides." It had taken Elena 54 years to understand that completely, but she understood it now, and that was enough. What this family went through isn't all that different from what so many people deal with in silence, behind closed doors, not knowing how to get out. There's an e-book in the description that might be the first step toward something different.